Well, I also need these. We're less than 2 weeks into the hurricane season. I don't know if you realize that. It started on June 1st, and we're less than 2 weeks in. And what that means is that for the next 6 months, according to what scientists tell us, and meteorologists, the conditions will be just right, that their chances of a hurricane forming are greater during this time of year than any other time of year. The temperature of the water, the direction of the wind, the moisture in the air, all these things will be at different levels and contribute to an atmosphere that's more conducive for hurricanes. Now, it doesn't mean that it's a for sure thing that we'll get a hurricane. It just means that the atmosphere, the conditions for a hurricane are greater because of these different circumstances that are going on. We live in a cultural type atmosphere. There are things that happen to us and around us all the time that we refer to as our culture. It's a type of atmosphere. And things in this cultural atmosphere can be such that it makes it more conducive for compromise. Things in the cultural atmosphere that we live in can be changing in such a way that there are times that compromise is much easier, in fact is more probable than at other times. And I believe that right now we are living in that kind of cultural atmosphere, that if things continue to go the way that they are, it will be harder and harder to not compromise what we say we believe. And I'm not just talking about people in general. I think that's true of people in general, but specifically people who claim to be followers of Jesus Christ. Because of the cultural atmosphere that we're in, it will become more and more difficult for us to stand firm in what we say we believe. And what that will cause us to do is want to compromise those things. So today, we're going to take a brief look at what I'm calling an atmosphere of compromise. We're going to look at the conditions of compromise, the cause of compromise, and we're going to finish up with a counter to compromise as we move our way through this morning. But before we get into the thick of things, let's define some things, because you might be going, well, compromise, I thought compromise was a good thing. I mean, isn't that the way relationships work? I mean, don't you have to compromise in order to have a good relationship? And I would say, yeah, there are times that compromise is a good thing. But just like so many other terms and words that we use, there are multiple definitions, multiple types of compromise. And so for the sake of our time together this morning, I want to zero in on one specific one, but let's talk about the one that maybe you're thinking about, the compromise that's good in relationships. And we're going to call that compromise A this morning. Compromise A would be, the definition would be this. It's when two parties come to an agreement by each agreeing to meet somewhere in the middle. So, you've got this party, and you've got this party, this person has this idea, this person has this idea, they're kind of apart on it, but they compromise by saying, you know what, I'm willing to give a little bit, and this person says, I'm willing to give a little bit, and they meet somewhere in the middle, and they come to a compromise. Now, that is typically a good thing. That type of compromise isn't a bad thing, because when we talk about that kind of compromise, we're talking about compromising on preferences. Remember, if you remember, we were here last week, we talked about the difference between preferences, and the idea of a preference is something that I'm not stuck on. I prefer it, for sure, but it's not a die for. I'm not going to battle on top of that hill. I'm willing to give some concessions. It's not a conviction, it's a preference. And so I can compromise on those things. When I think about this type of compromise, it makes me think about my married life. And when Louise and I first got married, for the first several months, I was the only one that had a job outside of our home. And so I would go off to work in the morning, I'd come back in the early evening, and she would be there, she'd been there all day, and she'd have a meal ready, and it was great. You know, and then we'd spend time together, and then we'd start all over again the next day. I'd go away, she'd stay home, I'd come back, the meal would be ready, we'd just enjoy some time together. And that went that way for several months, but then things changed. Because then we both ended up not only with full-time jobs, but in new positions that we had never experienced before. And so we had this, burden of trying to figure out these new positions. Plus we were working sometimes till 6:30, 7 o'clock at night. And so things for me initially didn't change. I came home, I relaxed, Louise would make dinner. And I thought it was great. But it didn't last very long. Because she came to me and she said, "This is not going to work. We are both working full-time, we're both working the same amount of hours, we both come home at the same time, you go and relax, and I keep working." And so, we came to a compromise. The two parties got together, and they met in the middle. And what we decided was that we would take turns cooking dinner, and on the odd night, we'd order pizza. Worked out great. Two parties agreeing that something needs to change, willing to meet in the middle, compromise can be a good thing. But that's not the kind of compromise we're talking about this morning. We're talking about what I'm going to call compromise B. You have your notes this morning. Compromise B is when a person concedes their values, their principles, their convictions. When a person says, okay, you know what? I'm not going to hold on to this. I'm going to concede this. I'm going to give it up. I'm going to let it go. I'm going to walk away, from values, principles, or convictions. And just to kind of bring us up to speed, if you weren't with us last week, or if you were with us, kind of a review, remember what a conviction is. Let's put that up on the screen so that we can review it together again. A conviction, when we're talking about a conviction, it's a rock-solid certainty that something is absolutely true. We're so rock-solidly convinced that it's true that what results is I have a willingness to take a stand for that regardless of what the consequences are. I'm so rock-solidly convinced that I'm not going to change my thought on it because it's not a preference. It's a conviction. And it doesn't matter what the consequences are, I'm sticking to it. Compromise, the kind of compromise we're talking about this morning, says, yes, I have this, but because of the cultural environment or atmosphere I find myself in, I'm going to concede my values, principles, or convictions and walk away from those things. That's the type of compromise that we're talking about this morning. Folks, listen, get this. You and I must never compromise our convictions. Understand this. If it's truly, here's my contention. If it's truly a conviction, if you really, honestly are rock solidly certain that it's true, you never should concede it, no matter what the consequences are. You're in. That could be pretty serious. Yeah, it could. We talked about that last week. If you weren't with us, I would encourage you to go back and listen to that message because, listen, this is so vital that we understand what it means to be a person of conviction. And when we talk about compromise this morning, we're talking about being a person who does not walk away from that rock-solid thing that we say we believe is certainly true. And that's where we want to go this morning. That's where we want to zero in on. What is it? What are the kinds of things that may stir us up to consider walking away from the convictions that we have, compromising our convictions? So, here we go. The cultural conditions of compromise. Josh just read in 2 Timothy chapter 3, this section of scripture that Paul was writing to Timothy, who was younger than Paul, quite a bit younger, and he was a pastor in a church, and Paul was writing to encourage him in his leadership, to help him to know better how to lead this church and how to lead these people. This particular letter that Josh just read from was the second letter that Paul had written to this young pastor. And when we get to chapter 3, he shares with him, he gets him prepared. He says, look, you need to know that as we get closer to the end, the atmosphere is going to get more and more conducive for you to compromise. It's really what he's saying. You say, well, wow, what do you mean by, last days and the end? I mean, isn't that something down the road? Well, in Scripture, in the New Testament, whenever you see a reference to the last days, that's any time from the time that Jesus left the earth, when Jesus ascended to heaven, any time from there until the end. Right? So what does that mean? That means we are living in the last days. We've been living in the last days. You go, wow, are these the last of the last days? I don't know. But if you read what Paul wrote to Timothy here, it makes you wonder. Let's read these first 5 verses again. Look what he says. You should know this, Timothy. In other words, Timothy, take note of this. Make sure you understand this, Timothy, that in the last days, there's going to be some very difficult times. For people will love only themselves and their money. They will be boastful and proud, scoffing at God, disobedient to their parents, and ungrateful. They will consider nothing sacred. They will be unloving and unforgiving. They will slander others and have no self-control. They will be cruel and hate what is good. They will betray their friends, be reckless, be puffed up with pride, love pleasure rather than God. They will act religious, but they will reject the power that can make them godly. Stay away from people like that. Now, if I didn't know that, I would swear I was reading a modern-day analysis of the culture that we're living in right now when I read those 5 verses. Are you with me? I mean, does that not sound like it characterizes where we are in our culture today? There are 20 things in these 5 verses. We're not going to look at all 20 of these this morning. One day we will, but we're not going to go through all 20 of these. Most of them are self-explanatory. You could look at them and go, wow, yeah, I get that, I know that, I understand that. We're not going to look at all these, but what we are going to do, I've broken them down into just a general categories that give us an idea of what the atmosphere, what the conditions are in a cultural atmosphere that makes it conducive to compromise. Here we go. Here's the first one. Violent or demonic activity. You know, wait a minute. Where do you see that? It's right there in verse 1. Paul says, know this, Timothy, you should know this, that in the last days there will be difficult, very difficult times. Now, you may have a different translation that says perilous times, or something along those lines. Let me tell you what that word in the original Greek language, it's translated very difficult, what that means. It literally means violent. That's what the word means. So pop up that verse. Violent times. Now, do you think that we live in some violent times today? Now I'm going to give you an illustration just a minute. But you may be wondering, okay, that explains the violent. What about the demonic? Get this. This is super, to me, it's super interesting. The only other time that Greek word for it's translated very difficult here shows up is in the story of Matthew, chapter 8, verse 28, where Jesus and his disciples are in a boat and they go across the Sea of Galilee there and they get out on the other side and they're confronted by two guys possessed by demons. Look what it says. Look what it says in Matthew 8:28. When Jesus arrived on the other side of the lake, in the region of the Gadarenes, two men who were possessed by demons met him. They came out of the tombs and were so, here it is, violent that no one could go through that area. It's the same Greek word. It's back in 2 Timothy chapter 3. Listen. What do we know about these guys that were demon-possessed? Well, maybe you remember the story, maybe you don't, but let me tell you what's going on. We find out in the rest of the story in Matthew chapter 8 that these guys were so full of demonic activity that they had supernatural strength. That when the people in the area tried to subdue them and tie them with ropes, they broke the ropes. When they put chains on them, they broke the chains. They had supernatural strength because of the demonic activity going on inside of them. And we find out later that they were possessed not by one demon, but by several, and to some accounts, maybe hundreds of demons were in these guys. And so the way it describes their activity and what they did in the tombs is that they were violent individuals. Folks, listen. I believe as we look at the violence that is rising around us in our culture, it has got to be demonically oriented, some of it. It has got to be from the pit of hell, some of it. And so what Paul is saying here to Timothy, he says, look, Timothy, you better make note of this. As things get closer to the end, you go, well, wait a minute, man. Things have been violent, people have been killed, things have happened. Yeah, okay, that's true. But remember what Jesus said when he was talking about the end. That the things that he was going to describe would happen, the characteristics, would be like birth pangs in a woman ready to give birth. Well, what was that description? How does that work? Well, remember, they start off and they're far apart, right? But as time gets closer and closer to birth, they come more frequently and more violently. And so when Paul says, Timothy, look, get ready, and you go, well, that's 2,000 years ago. We've had violence since then. But you have to look and go, has it increased? Is it crazier than it's been? So here we go. This is just from the last couple days. I'll put this up for you. There have been 160 shootings. This is just the U.S., by the way. There have been 160 shootings from January 1st to April 26th of this year, in which 4 or more people were injured or killed, compared to just over 90 during the same period in 2020. And this year's total is nearly double the average for the same time period for every year since 2014. And you know what the common excuse for this is? Oh, it's COVID. It's the pandemic, it's COVID. Oh. Okay, so we're going to excuse people going around shooting each other on the virus. And does that make any sense? Listen, folks. The conditions that we live in are such that the atmosphere in our culture is being stirred in a more violent, detrimental pattern. Listen, let's not talk murder. Let's talk just about verbal violence. Have you noticed how it's difficult for anybody to have a discussion on opposite ends of an issue? It becomes verbally violent. I can't tell you how many times I've tried to watch certain situations, interviews, people on different sides of the spectrum, and it ends up a shouting match where they're not dealing with the issue at all, but they're calling each other names. And that somehow justifies we're right because you're this, versus dealing with the issue. It's verbal violence. And it doesn't just been on television interviews, YouTube interviews. I watch this live with people. And I don't know about you, but it makes me very cautious of the kind of discussions that I get into with people, because I'm nervous that it may turn out to be this verbally violent situation. And that never should be. Why are we in that kind of culture where we can't discuss things that we disagree on to where it gets verbally violent? I think, again, it's just the stirring of the atmosphere, this cultural atmosphere that we're in. How about virtual violence? Hear of cyberbullying? Right now, they can't even totally measure it because it's so rampant. And we hide behind the internet to spit out this vitriol toward each other, all this rubbish, and we kind of hide behind our computer stuff that we would never say face to face. But somehow we feel free because we're in the virtual situation, and we type out this garbage, sometimes violent stuff. So bad, and again, this is not the topic that we're on, but so bad that at least some of the social media sites have said, well, we're not going to let that happen. But it never should get that far, right? How about domestic violence? It's amazing to me. One of the very first things that I began to think about shortly after the lockdown a year ago was, this is dangerous for the children, and especially the women that are already in situations where they're in danger of domestic violence. What can be done about that? And I couldn't think of any solutions. But here's the crazy thing. Within the first few months, I was reading articles. Wow, it's amazing. People are reporting domestic violence. Domestic violence is down. And I'm thinking, you guys, you're crazy. It's not down. They're just not reporting it. And you know what we're finding out now? That that's exactly the case. It wasn't being reported. It is epidemic. Now please don't. Sometimes people take what I say and they misconstrue it. This has nothing to do with whether the lockdown was right or wrong. That's not even the point. The point is what happened. Because of it, it put more people in danger, and as a result, domestic violence is up. And my contention is, keep your eye on it, because it probably won't get any better anytime soon. Because we are in an environment, a cultural environment, where the pot is being stirred. So what is all this to say? It's simply this. Paul tells Timothy 2,000 years ago, look, as time goes on, you better make note of it, Timothy. As time goes on, we get closer and closer to the end. In these last days, violence will increase. Demonic activity that produces violence will increase. Jesus said, just like a woman who's about ready to give birth, it will intensify as we get closer to the end. And the intensity is rising. Are we in the last of the last days? I don't know. But we certainly are moving in that direction. And this is one of the things in the cultural atmosphere that makes it conducive to compromise our convictions. There's number 2. Self-indulgence. In verse 2, Paul says, for people will love only themselves and their money. Yeah, we could spend a whole message on that. Just in and of itself. But I mean, when we look at it, I want you to think about it. Don't raise your hand. I want you to think about it. And maybe I'm just kind of the only one in the dark on this. But, I mean, those of you that are older enough, I know some of you are. But, I mean, 20 years ago, let's go 20 years ago. Did you remember, if you think back up, can you remember hearing the the word, the term narcissist? I mean, I've heard it. I think I could have maybe given you a definition, maybe, but you didn't hear it much. If you get a chance today, go on Amazon and put in the search, just narcissism, and see how many books come up on narcissism that were written in the last 10 years. It's amazing. It is amazing. You say, well, Randy, what's a narcissist? It's a person who's absolutely self-indulged. It's a person that's all about me. And we see it just exploding. You say, well, where do we see it exploding? Well, how about the internet? How about social media? Here you go. Ready? Let's put that up there. I know some of this is hard to read, so I'll read it for you. 93 million selfies are taken daily in the world. You say, well, I take selfies. I'm not a narcissist. Yeah, you are. I heard that. No, of course, it doesn't necessarily mean just because you take a selfie, you're a narcissist. But it certainly lends itself to narcissistic behavior. Especially when you're taking pictures of yourself. You know, it's one thing if you've got a group of people and you're out somewhere, but if it's constantly of yourself and you're doing, the little lip thing or the little whatever, and you know, what the heck is this? Or you're taking it just right so that certain parts of your body are more enhanced than others. You better check. Self-indulgence might really be a problem, right? 3 out of 10 pictures taken by people 18 to 24 are selfies. 55% of millennials have taken a selfie and shared it on social media. 74% of all images shared on Snapchat are selfies. I know for some of you are going, Snap, what? But most of them Instagram has 1,000 selfies posted every 10 seconds. And these stats are old. It's more than that. Think about that. What are we doing? Look at me. Look, I'm eating this. I'm buying this. I'm wearing this. What is that? Honestly, folks, I know, I'm an old guy. I don't get it. I really don't. Number one, I don't get where you got that much time to get that many pictures of yourself. And you know, I don't mean to hurt your feelings, but you really don't look all that good, honestly. But Paul told Timothy back then, listen, one of the characteristics of an atmosphere that's conducive in the culture for you and I to potentially compromise our convictions is one where self-indulgence is growing and expanding. And man, if you can't see that in the culture that we live, I'm not sure there'd be much that would convince you. We are consumed with looks. Get this, and I don't have the stat for you on the screen. 55% of the people that go and see a plastic surgeon go so that they can get alterations to look better online. So, 55%, that's over half. They tell the doctor, I want this and this and this because I want to look better when I take pictures of myself. That's amazing. You know, it's sad. In so many ways, it's sad. And here's why. A big chunk of that, and you can call me sexist if you want, but look it up online because the stats are a large majority is women, young women. And what it tells me is, please notice me, please, I want to be worth something to somebody. I want to be meaningful to somebody. Because if you look at the stats of where we are with families and kids growing up without a dad, listen, And again, you can call me whatever you want. I absolutely, totally know this is true because I've lived it. You raise up a little girl, dads, and you don't spend time loving on her, she will look for love somewhere else. Because she needs it. She needs to know she's beautiful. She needs to know that she's important, that she's worth something. And if you don't give it to her, she's going to find it somewhere else. Maybe you'll be fortunate enough that it'll just be online selfies. Maybe. The chances are it's going to be in the arms of some guy who's going to tell her everything she wants to hear, and he doesn't mean a bit of it. He just wants to fill in the blank. See, that's where we're at. We're creating an atmosphere that makes it much more conducive to compromise our conviction. Here's number 3. We've got to move through this quick. Moral confusion. Verse 3 and 4 says this: they will be unloving, unforgiving. They will slander others, have no self-control. They'll be cruel. They'll hate what is good. See, that's kind of a summary of everything he's talking about. They'll betray their friends, be reckless, be puffed up with pride. We are living in a culture right now that is moving more and more toward cultural confusion. Chaos. How many know who Blue's Clues is? Okay. Let me show you the latest. Here we go. Here's the headline. Blue's Clues rings in Pride Month in singing along starring drag queen Nina West, celebrating LGBTQ families. Let me read you part of the article. And by the way, this is not on some, right wing. I know sometimes some of you think I'm reading stuff. Where did you get that? This is from the article. Nickelodeon is ringing in the first week of Pride Month with a special sing-along video featuring an animated drag queen and everyone's favorite furry friend, Blue. Blue's Clues published a new video to its YouTube channel called The Blue's Clues Pride Parade Sing-Along, featuring RuPaul's Drag Race Season 11 contestant, Nina West. And that's a picture of. As the parade continues marching, here's some of the lyrics from the song. This family has 2 mommies. They love each other so proudly, and they all go marching in the big parade. West sings before spotlighting another family featuring 2 dads. As the parade continues marching, the song expands to more people in the LGBTQ community, including those who are trans and non-binary. Quote, Ace, Bi, and Pan, grown-ups, you can see, love each other so proudly, West sings. Allies to the queer community who love their queer friends so proudly. Love is love, you see, and everyone should love proudly. Don't tell me that we're not trying to indoctrinate our children. Don't even tell me that. This whole Nickelodeon-based is for preschoolers. It was created for the preschool-age kids. And we're using a drag queen to teach them about pride in the way that people have sex. If that's not confusing, we are in a culture that is more and more morally confused. And it makes it more and more conducive for you and I, if we're not careful, to compromise our convictions. Here's number 4. A mass turning from God. Verse 4 at the end of the verse says that they'll love pleasure rather than God. Now see, let me stop there for a minute because we can misunderstand something like that if we don't read it carefully. It doesn't say that pleasure is bad. God created pleasure. Listen, we have an amazing, part of what we want to do the next 2 weeks for the kids in camp is to show them we have a God who created you to have fun. He's a fun God. Why do you think he laughed? Because he created you to laugh. Wouldn't it be amazing, wouldn't it be sad if God created one flavor, everything tasted the same? Can you imagine how boring that would be? Every drink you ever drank tasted like water. That's it. No matter what color, no matter what bubbles in it, it all tastes like. But see, God is so gracious and so good that he gives us variety in what we eat, and smell, and what we see. That's God who made us like that. He created us to be people that enjoy pleasure, but that's not what Paul's saying here. It says that they love pleasure rather than God. They make pleasure king. Let me just give you one very simple connection with what we just saw. God made us sexual creatures. Sex is supposed to be fun. Because God made it that way. But it's not supposed to be something that we put rather than God. And that's what's happening. We are in a culture that worships the sexual experience. So much so that the typical way for people to enjoy the sexual experience is not good enough anymore. Now we're experimenting and going after different things. And don't think it's going to stop. It's going to keep going. It's going to get more and more vile and more weird. I'm telling you. Why? Because we're taking a pleasure that God made, something good, something great, and we're elevating it to God. And we're worshiping the pleasure. And Paul said, listen, this is what's going to happen. People are going to take these good pleasures that God, and they're going to twist them and distort them and make them something bad. They'll act religious, but they'll reject the power. Here's a headline just the other day. 43% of millennials don't know, don't care, don't believe God exists. Researchers found that among other recent generations, millennials have gone farther in cutting ties with traditional Christian views and normative biblical teaching. 43% of millennials stated that they either don't know, don't care, or don't believe God exists. That's compared to 28% of boomers. The study also found that overall, younger Americans are significantly more likely than the two previous generations to embrace horoscopes as a guide, karma as a life principle, and to see getting even with others as defensible, to accept evolution over creation, and to view owning property as fostering economic injustice. On spiritual matters, Americans younger than 55 are far more likely to distrust the Bible and believe God is uninvolved in people's lives. Atheism in this country has doubled in less than 10 years. But we're at, folks, a mass turning away from God. So much so that our millennials are saying, I don't know. Frankly, I don't care. And some are saying, I just don't even believe it. Paul said, Timothy, you better check this out, dude. Because as we get closer and closer to the end, these things are going to be the conditions in the culture that you better take note of. And I'm telling you that we better take note of them because these are culturally atmospheric conditions that make it more and more conducive for you and I to compromise what we say our convictions are. So why would I do that? What would be the reason that I would compromise? Real quick, here they are. I'm going to give you 4 real fast. First one is fear of criticism. We live in a society where it's just reality. If you stand up for biblical truth, you will get criticized. And some of us don't like that. I don't like it. I don't like getting criticized. But the reality is, if you stand up for something that's biblically true, you're going to get criticized. You're going to get labeled. You're going to get called a bigot. You're going to get called a racist, a homophobe, a sexist, whatever. Just the list goes on. I mean, isn't it interesting that when we called each other names as kids, we got in trouble for it, but now as we do it as adults, it's somehow sophisticated? Interesting. Here's number 2. Not only fear of criticism, but fear of failure. See, here's what happens. And again, don't raise your hand, because I'm not trying to embarrass anybody, because I'm here too at times. We're in a conversation, we hear something, but we're afraid to say our conviction because we're not sure we know enough to be able to make a good enough argument. And we don't want to fail. I hate to fail. I hate to lose. I'm a really poor loser. I like to win. Even in conversations. And I have to really put that in check what I'm having. Because I want to beat up on people sometimes. Physically as well as verbally sometimes. And I don't want to fail. I don't want to walk away going, oh, shucks. I should have said it. And I think some of you are like that too. And so instead of taking the risk of failure, we just keep our mouths shut. And when we do that, folks, it's a kind of subtle compromise of our convictions. Here's number 3, fear of rejection. Okay, got a question for you this morning. How many of you want to be rejected? I thought so. I don't know anybody. So, what I'm really hoping happens today, before the end of the day, I hope I get rejected by someone. I mean, I won't feel like the day is successful unless somebody rejects me today. Most of us work our way through life trying to do all that we can to not get rejected, right? Nobody likes to go through rejection. We're careful. We don't want to put ourselves in a situation where someone will just go, "Later's with you," right? And we now live in what's called the cancel culture, which is just a nice way of saying rejection, to the point of losing your job, losing your integrity, all the things that go with that. I don't want to take that risk. I don't want to be rejected. And so we don't speak up and speak out. Here's the last one, fear of loss. Someone says, "Man, all that's fine. Not compromising, standing for your convictions, all of that's good and well, but you don't understand. This is a serious deal for me. I literally could lose my job if I said no." Some of you may be in a situation where you think you might lose your spouse. Your spouse will walk out. Some of you may be in a situation where I'll lose a promotion. I have a chance. I've been in this business or this company or this situation long enough that I could very well get a promotion soon, and I got to watch. I can't, rock the boat because I want to make sure. Some of you are in a situation like some people that have been in the news the last couple of years where they've lost their business because they stood on their convictions. They said, "I'm not going to compromise." No matter how tumultuous the atmosphere gets, I'm not going to compromise. And they lost their business. Paul told Timothy in verse 12, he said, everyone who wants to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will suffer persecution. We really haven't seen a whole lot of that in this country in my lifetime, but we're starting to experience it, and it's going to get worse. oh, that's kind of a downer. You know, it's reality. Just look around you. Just look around you. I'll tell you what I have great hope for. I have great hope for the generation coming up right now. I see some really bright guys and girls that have some backbone. And it really encourages me. I think there's a good chance that they're going to be the generation that stands up for Christ in a way that we never did, some of us. And that really encourages me. But Paul said, look, Timothy, get ready. Yeah, you know what? I might lose my job. Yeah. I'm not going to try to sugarcoat it and tell you that you may not lose status, you may not lose money, you may not... Let me share this last one with you and we're done. Some of you saw this. Headline reads, Virginia teacher placed on leave after speech disputing biological boy can be a girl and vice versa. An elementary school physical education teacher in Virginia was placed on leave after an explosive speech in which he told his school board he wouldn't, quote, affirm that a biological boy can be a girl and vice versa. During a Loudoun County School Board meeting Tuesday, teacher Byron Tanner Cross voiced his opposition to proposed policies surrounding gender. Quote, my name is Tanner Cross, and I'm speaking out of love for those who are suffering from gender dysphoria. He went on to discuss a 60-minute special about the issue. 60 Minutes this past Sunday interviewed over 30 young people who transitioned, but they felt led astray because of lack of pushback or how easy it was to make physical changes to their bodies. They are now detransitioning, he said. It's not my intention to hurt anyone, but there are certain truths that we must face when ready. We condemn school policies that would damage children and defile the holy image of God. I love all my students, but I will never lie to them regardless of the consequences. I'm a teacher, but I serve God first, and I will not affirm that a biological boy can be a girl and vice versa, because it's against my religion. It's lying to a child, it's abuse to a child, and it's sin against our God. You talk about a guy who stepped into the mouth of a lion and took a stand and said, no, listen, these are not preferences, these are convictions. I am rock solidly convinced that the certainty of this is true, and no matter what the consequence, I'm standing. No matter how bad the atmosphere in the culture gets, I'm not going to compromise. What did it cost him? Within the next couple of days, he got suspended from his position. Now, thankfully, since then, a court order came in and re-established him back as a teacher, but it's still pending. The outcome isn't done. But here's an example of a guy that said, look, this, I will not compromise this. And it's not just about me. It's about the kids that God has called me to love on and to speak truth to. And I can't do it. So what's the counter to compromise? Here. It's right here in this chapter. How do you counter compromise? He says in verse 14, he says, Timothy, you must remain faithful to the things you've been taught. You know they're true, for you can trust those who taught you. So what's the counter? And be faithful to your convictions. We got to be faithful to what we know is true. That's why we're calling this series Doctrines and Doctrines. We haven't even talked about any doctrines yet. I know. We've been building the foundation, and we're going to start talking about them next week, I promise. But what I wanted to do the last couple of weeks is to help us to understand, before we actually ever touch any of the doctrines that are worth dying for, that we've got to be people of conviction. We've got to be people that come to a place where we say, I'm so rock solidly convinced that this is true. That no matter what the consequences are, I'm not changing. No matter how bad the conditions in the cultural atmosphere get, I'm not compromising. It may cost me dearly, but I'm not backing down. These are truths, these are doctrines worth dying for